What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today, we are going to be continuing on 2 Samuel chapter 2, and we're going to be going from 12 verses 12 to 32, and we're going to find out through this conflict. We're going to see through this huge conflict, we're going to learn the lessons of this conflict, a lesson on pride and ambition. We're going to touch on, in the definition part of it, the difference between having ambition and selfish ambitions, as well as we're going to find out the answer to the ending of conflict and war with our brethren. We're going to see the sense of brotherhood in this conflict and why it's so important for us. When we have the opportunity to end war and conflict, we should do so immediately to preserve the brotherhood, a lesson on forgiveness, and to move forward. So without further ado, let's get right into this video. First, we're going to be hitting with the definitions. We need to find the words that is going to be impactful, that we know that's going to help us to be able to study this Bible. So the words that I selected was pride, ambition, conflict, war, and brotherhood. That's going to be important. So without further ado, let's get right into this video. Let's get started. When God gives you that peace, you will rest in His security, His protection, His comfort, His love. Okay, so first we're going to hit on brotherhood. So brotherhood has blessings, but it also has curses. We see that. So how we see that is the basis for brotherhood. It brings the basic knowledge of peace within the brotherhood. When we have a brotherhood, it gives us peace. We see that in Genesis chapter 13, verse 8, and it reads, "Finally, Abraham said to Lot, 'Let's not allow this conflict to become between us or our herdsmen. After all, we are close relatives.'" We see that. But also we see the betrayals of the brotherhood. So I'm not going to read them, but I'm going to give you a snippet, and you can copy these down. You could copy these chapters and verses down so you can go back and look at them. So for one is Genesis chapter 4 verses 1 to 16. And as we see is that is what we see in Genesis chapter 4 verses 1 to 16 is Cain killing Abel. That was a conflict within the brotherhood, right? We also see in Genesis chapter 37 verses 1 to 36, we see in Joseph being sold off to slavery by his brothers. We see that also. But we also see in James chapter 2 verses 1 to 5, whenever we showing favor to one person rather than the other person, that's also a conflict of brotherhood. But the blessings that we have, the blessings that we share, the blessings that we get from brotherhood are in Psalms chapter 133 verses 1, and it reads, "How wonderful and pleasant it is when brothers live together in harmony." We also see in Proverbs chapter 17 verse 17, "A friend is always loyal and a brother is born to help in the time of need." We see that. But we must understand and we must know the dangers of offending the brethren. We see that in Romans chapter 14 verses 21. "It is better not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything else if it might cause another believer to stumble." We also see in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 verse 11, "Because of your superior knowledge, a weak believer for whom Christ died will be destroyed." That's serious. We see the dangers. But we also have a responsibility to be a brotherhood, to live in peace and to live in harmony with our brethren. So we see that in Genesis chapter 4 verses 9, and it reads, "Afterwards the Lord asked Cain, 'Where's your brother? Where's Abel?' 'I don't know,' Cain responded. 'Am I my brother's guardian?' With a question mark. We are supposed to be our brother's keeper or guardian. We also see in Deuteronomy chapter 15 verse 11, "There will always be some in the land who are poor. That is why I am commanding you to share freely with the poor and with other Israelites in need." So sometimes our brotherhood is tested. And we see this in 1 John chapter 2 verse 9, and it reads, "If anyone claims I am living in the light but hates a fellow believer, that person will still living in darkness. We also see in 1 John chapter 3 verse 14, and it reads, "If we love our brothers and sisters who are believers, it proves that we have passed from death to life. But if a person who has no love is still dead." We also see in 1 John chapter 4 verse 20, we see, "If someone says I love God but hates a fellow believer, that person is a liar. For if we don't love people we can see, how can we love God whom we cannot see?" Serious. If someone says I love God but hate a fellow believer, that person is a liar. For if we don't love people we can see, how can we love God whom we can't not see? So now that we got that definition out of the way, now let's go into war. Let's see what war teaches us. We see, dealing with war, we see that wars must cease throughout the land. We read that in Psalms chapter 46 verse 9. He causes war to end throughout the earth. He breaks the bow and snaps the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Now we see at times of war and a time for peace. We see that in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 8. A time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. We also see there comes a time when we will never have to train for a war again. We see that in Isaiah chapter 2 verse 4. The Lord will mediate between nations and will settle international disputes. They will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations will no longer fight against nation nor train for war anymore. We also see, do not wage war according to the flesh. Never wage war according to the flesh. We see that in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 3. And it reads, "We are human, but we don't wage war as humans do." So now that we got that out of the way, now let's talk about conflict, which is much shorter. Conflict is a hot-tempered person stirs up conflict. We see that in Proverbs chapter 15 verse 18. A hot-tempered person starts fights. A cool-tempered person stops them. Now we move over to ambitions. Now we see the difference between ambitions. Having ambition is not a bad thing, but having selfish ambitions is a bad thing. We see that in James chapter 3 verse 14. "But if you are bitterly jealous and there is a selfish ambition in your heart, don't cover up the truth with boasting and lying." We see that, right? Also know is bitter jealousy and selfish ambition are inspired by the devil. It is easy for us to be drawn into a wrong desire by the pressure of our society, and sometimes even by well-meaning Christians. By listening to the advice, assert yourself, go for it, set high goals, we can be drawn into greed and destructive competitiveness. Seeking God's wisdom delivers us from the need to compare ourselves to others and to want what they have. That is ambition and selfish ambition. Those are the differences. Now we go into pride. We see humility. We must always bring humility. Humility leads us to wisdom. Pride leads us to disgrace. We see that Proverbs chapter 11 verse 2. Pride leads to disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. We also see humility takes advice. Pride produces conflict. That's Proverbs chapter 13 verse 10. We see that having humility leads us to honor, but we see that pride leads us to punishment. You see both of those in Proverbs chapter 15 verse 33 and Proverbs chapter 16 verse 18. We see in Proverbs chapter 18 verse 12, humility ends in honor. Pride ends in downfall. We also see in Proverbs chapter 29 verse 23, it says humility brings honor, pride brings humiliation. Proverbs is direct and forceful in rejecting pride. The proud attitude heeds the list of 7 things of God hates. The 7 things that God hates. There are 6 things that God hates. No, there was actually 7 things he detests. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that kill the innocent, a heart that plots evil, feet that race to do wrong, a false witness who pours out lies, person who sows discord in families. Those are it. The harmful results of pride are constantly contrasted with humility and its benefits. Okay, so now I know that was a mouthful. I know we did a lot of definitions, but now when we read this chapter, or we finish out this chapter, you'll be able to have a really good understanding of what we are doing and why we are doing it. So we're going over to open your Bibles to 2 Samuel chapter 2, verses 12, and we'll read all the way down. And it reads, a day Abner left Ishbaith troops from Mananim to Gibeon. About the same time, Joab, son of Zeruiah, led David's troop out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. The two groups sat down there, face each other from opposite sides of the pool. Then Abner suggested to Joab, let's have a few of our warriors fight hand to hand here in front of us. All right, Joab agreed. So 12 men were chosen to fight from each side, 12 men of Benjamin representing Ishbaith, son of Saul, and 12 representing David. Each one grabbed his opponent by the hair and thrust his sword into the other's side so that all of them died. So this place at Gibeon had been known ever since as the Field of Swords. A fierce battle followed that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were defeated by the forces of David. Verse 18. Joab, Abishai, and Ahil, the three sons of Zeruiah, were among David's forces that day. Ahil could run like a gazelle, and he began chasing Abner. He pursued him relentlessly, not stopping for anything. When Abner looked back and saw him coming, he called out, "Is that you, Ahil?" "Yes, it is," he replied. "Go fight someone else," Abner warned. "Take on one of the younger men and strip him of his weapon." But Asahel kept right on chasing Abner. Again, Abner shouted to him, Get away from here. I don't want to kill you. How could I ever face your brother Joab again?" But Asahel refused to turn back. So Abner thrust the butt end of his spear through Asahel's stomach, and the spear came out through his back. He stumbled to the ground and died there. And everyone who came by the spot stopped and stood still when they saw Asahel lying there. When Joab and Asahel found out what had happened, they set up after Abner. The sun was just going down as they arrived at the hill of Ammah near Giah, along the road to the wilderness of Gibeon. Abner troops from the tribe of Benjamin regrouped there at the top of the hill to take a stand. Abner shouted down to Joab, "Must we always be killing each other? Don't you realize that bitterness is the only result? When will you call off your men from chasing their Israelite brothers?" Then Joab said, "God only knows what would happen if you hadn't spoke, for we would have chased you all night if necessary." So Joab blew the ram's horn, and his men stopped chasing the troops of Israel. All that night, Abner and his men retreated through Jordan Valley. They crossed the Jordan River, traveling all through the morning, and didn't stop until they arrived in Gehenna. Meanwhile, Joab and his men also returned home. When Joab counted his casualties, he discovered that only 19 men were missing in addition to Asa. But 360 of Abner's men had been killed, all from the tribe of Benjamin. Joab and his men took Ashel's body to Bethlehem and buried him there in his father's tomb. Then they traveled all night and reached Hebron at daybreak. That is God's holy word. Let's break this down. So the first lesson that we'll see in 12 to 24 is the attempt by Abner and to enlarge his king rules and to the eruption of conflict with David. This lesson is a lesson on pride and ambition. In verses 12 to 24, the march to Gibeon, we see that the confrontation with David's general Joab, he met at the pool of Gibeon. They faced off against each other, reached an impasse or stalemate. We see the challenge of Abner. How? To have a wrestling type contest or a deadly hand-to-hand contest between selected soldiers. The soldiers and combatants were chosen, 12 to represent each king. The combat was quick and deadly. All 24 warriors died, each killing the other. The place were memorialized, called Elkath Zeruhum, the field of daggers and hostilities. The escalation into a full-scale battle. Abner was so soundly defeated. David's nephew fought The determined pursuit of Abner by Asahel. Asahel was light on his feet, very fast and focused on catching Abner to eliminate the power behind the rival throne. Abner attempted to avoid the fight. We see that Asahel he asked him to stop the pursuit. He asked him to turn and fight someone else. Asahel refused. Abner asked Asahel again. He did not wish to kill Joab's brother. He wished to avoid the blood feud or the bloodshed too. Asahel refused to give up the chase. Abner killed Asahel. We see that. He used the blunt end of his spear. Probably he hoped to disable him temporarily so he could prevent a blood feud with Joab. That's what I think. The courageous brothers of Asahel and Joab and Ashiah continued to pursue of Abner. They chased him till sun was down. So we see that. But what we also will see. Now we go into the next lesson. The end of the first conflict between Judea and Israel. The answer to ending conflict and war with a sense of brotherhood. We see this in verses 25 to 32, and let's go into it. We see in these verses, the army of Abner railed on top of a hill. The proposal of reason shouted out by Abner. The conflict needed to stop because the danger of deep-seated bitterness within a nation, because they were brothers. The response of Joab, he had determined to pursue Abner till morning, but he would accept the fact of their brotherhood under God. He ordered his troops to halt. The fighting stop. He wanted it to end. The retreat of Abner under the cloak of darkness, crossed the Jordan River in the dark, returned to their capital, Mahanaim. The casualties of the battle, Joab, we see, resembled his troops. He counted 19 missing. The count 360 of Abner's men killed, all from the Benjamites. Joab had Asahel buried in the family tomb at Bethlehem. The march or return of Joab and his troops to Hebron, the capital city of David's kingdom. We have discovered why brotherhood is so important, but we also have noticed and we have seen how what conflict and war can happen. We know the difference now between ambition and having selfish ambitions, to be operating out of the flesh. We also see how pride can take hold of someone and how we always need to have humility. I want to thank you for watching. We have ended this chapter and now we go over to chapter 3. I'll see you over there. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you can be notified when I upload new videos. And if you're already here and this is your first time being here, hit the subscribe button. You here. Thank you. God bless you and God bless your families.